Hey everybody, it's me, Andrea Merida. Sorry about the hassle, the late start there. I was using another app that I thought was going to work. And I'm going to try real quick here to get other folks onto this new thread because this is all kind of weird. I'm not exactly sure what is going on here. And I thought I had it all down, but I don't seem to have it all down. So, but anyway, let's see. Anyway, let's start this video. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this stuff that's been going on in Colorado. You've probably seen, you've probably been spammed by a group of people who have put together a grievance that they're calling Restoring Green Values. And, admittedly, this has caused quite a bit of turmoil. This grievance was, in my opinion, time to impact the steering committee elections. I've gotten information now that some people were coordinating that were not from Colorado and, just kind of stirring up the pot a little bit and trying to use it for political ends and whatever else, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Having been a former elected official, I know how things can get hairy in politics. So, get ready because there's more of that coming where it came from, unfortunately. So anyway, I wanted to talk about this Restore Green Values thing. And I just want to tell you, you're going to probably hear some saxophone playing in the background because the partner teaches saxophone as part of his, his work. And so he's teaching a lesson. But anyway, I wanted to kind of touch on this topic here about the Restore Green Values grievance. Some of you may have seen it already. It's I don't know. It's what 800,000 pages long. I don't know. But it's quite long. There's a lot of screenshots. In Colorado, we tend to use evidence, and examples of what we're talking about. So that's where that penchant comes from. But I wanted to just really quickly just kind of walk you through a little bit of the way that the Colorado Green Party or the Green Party of Colorado actually works, because I think you need a little background information to understand kind of what's going on, because some of these grievances are about consolidation of power, about how proposals get run through our state council and things of that nature. So first of all, so in Colorado, we have ballot access. So you don't actually have to be a member of the Green Party of Colorado in order to be a Green. You can be just a registered Green. Now, there are many locals now that are starting to affix dues to their structure. And this is really important. I mean, I favor due structure, and I think we have to be able to work it out so that folks who would rather have a donation structure or who don't have the resources can participate and feel like they're welcome, even though they may not have the same amount of resources. Our dues in Denver are $5 a month, so it's quite modest, and our most economically precariously situated people are okay with that. I have to say, I don't believe in working off your dues. I think that's kind of classist. Anyway, so the way that it works here in Colorado is, you can be a registered member, and then we have 11 locals throughout the state. Denver, of course, is the biggest one because, it's the capital city of the state. And so each local is allowed 4 delegates to our state council. And our state council is basically the equivalent of the national committee, only on the state level. So not every local has all 4 delegates. In the case of Denver, for example, because we're the biggest one and we have more voting members, dues-paying members, and those would be the people that are eligible to be on our state council. We actually do have 4 delegates, plus we have a couple of alternates as well, and that's not always true for different locals around the state. But every local is entitled to 4. When we bring a new local online, we try to make sure that they at least have 4 people, 2 co-chairs, a secretary, and a treasurer, so that they can have full representation in their local until such time as they muster up and have more people and can kind of share those responsibilities. So the state council is the primary decision-making body. We do have 2 co-chairs, a secretary, and a treasurer for the entire state party. They're not really treated as an executive committee, and really most of the authority goes to the state council. So we have a democratic process whenever we want to change something or decide something in the state council. And we use a proposal system. Our rules state that you have to, if you want to change something or you want to improve or whatever, your local has to vote on a proposal, and then it gets submitted to our council facilitator. And assuming that everything is okay, that it comports with the bylaws, that that it makes sense, that it's legible, that that it's easy to understand, that sort of thing, then it'll go through. Some of that stuff is kind of like editorial in nature before it goes through, but as long as it meets with certain things, like you have to have the name of the sponsor, the title, the date that it's submitted. You have to have an action in the proposal section that actually tells you what's going to happen when this proposal gets enacted. And then you might have some references, and you might have background, and you might have pros and cons. So that's kind of basic, the bare bones of our proposal system. So it goes through. For most proposals, according to our bylaws, it has to pass with a quorum of 60%. 66% of our state council or locals. So right now, a quorum in Colorado in our state council would be 8 locals. So one person from each one of 8 locals needs to participate in order for us to get to quorum. And then most proposals have to pass with like a 60% approval. Now, there are some types of proposals that are a big, hairy deal. For example, if you want to recall an officer, or if you want to deactivate a local, or if you want to ban somebody from or revoke their rights of participation, that takes a 75% split. So, so that's kind of roughly how it works. If you want to see what our documents look like, go to coloradogreenparty.org, coloradogreenparty.org, and I'm going to put this here in the comments, so that you can go and then you can see in our About section, and you can see what our bylaws look like, and you can see what our procedures document looks like. So those are the 2 guiding documents that we have, the bylaws and then the procedures document. In some cases, what we try not to do, at least during the last 2 years that I've been co-chair, and I'm about to run for re-election in a couple of weeks for another 2-year stint, but what I've tried not to do is lean too much on precedent. I mean, if there is something that needs to be codified, then we have to run a proposal for it, because you can't really leave things open-ended. So in this grievance, there have been some interesting accusations being made. And these folks filed their grievance first to the steering committee, and then they filed it to the accreditation committee. And in their grievance, what they asked is, number one, that the national party come in and change the date of our state meeting, and it is still scheduled for August 12th. That they ban myself, my fellow co-chair Dave Bell, and my partner for life from the party, and that if failing that they dissolve GPCO's Green Party of Colorado's accreditation with GPUS. So that's a big deal. In the grievance that they filed, there were a few different kinds of things, and they kind of are in 2 or 3 different buckets. The first one refers to what they call as consolidation of power. They make several charges that, their proposals are not allowed to come forward, that I'm the only forum administrator, that sort of thing. And so I should explain, too, that in Colorado, we have a discussion/voting forum where we actually log on and we do our voting. So you have to, and you can, there's commentary that's allowed during proposals and that sort of thing. And we use a basic consensus process where it's an agreement seeking process. The proposal is brought forward. If there's, you go around, you make sure that everybody kind of agrees with it. What website platform do you use for voting commentary? We're using a Simple Machines forum. It's an open source forum. Thanks, Allison. Hi. So, and then of course, if there are blocking considerations, then it goes to a vote. That's just all the way. That's how it goes. So when they talk about consolidation of power, one of the things that they have accused me of is that I'm the only administrator on this forum, and I don't let anybody do anything, and I shut things down or whatever else like that. Now, our structure calls in our procedures document calls for the council facilitation to specifically be held by the co-chairs. In fact, in our procedures document, Section 3.5.1, the co-chairs will alternate as conveners, facilitators of the council, or a convener facilitator will be elected by the council. So we did have at one time a young woman who was acting as the facilitator of our state council forum. And she was doing pretty well. I should say she was there maybe, I want to say probably 2 years maybe. One of the previous co-chairs by the name of Bill Bartlett, I'll get to him, was the one that actually launched our forum. And in about a 4-year time since 2011, when he launched the forum, until about 2015, he was acting as the only administrator and the only council facilitator. I mean, it is what it is. And you know how it is in your state parties and your local parties. A lot of times the division of labor is a little imbalanced, and sometimes people have to take on a lot of extra duties that really should be shared by other people. It is what it is, right? And so I came on in co-chair of August of 2015, 2 years ago, almost to the date. And I was then added as another admin. Actually, I had to ask to be added as an admin. And it took a little while to get that done. But finally, I was added as an admin. And then at some point, this other co-chair, pretty unilaterally decided he was going to bring a young woman on to be the council facilitator. So in other words, when a proposal comes through, she posts it, she counts the votes, she kind of serves as a moderator of sorts. We do have kind of a code of conduct in our state council forum that most people follow, but generally they do. And things were going along. She was approving things. She was acting as council facilitator. As our document shows, you can either actually have someone, and I should point out, our document says that this person either it needs to be elected by the council, right? But this young woman was appointed by the previous co-chair, but she was clicking along. She was doing fine, that sort of thing like that. And then we had an individual named Harry Hempy that joined the party, became part of the state council. And I will say Harry is kind of a demanding person. And at the end of November of last year, or November 19th of last year, right after Election Day, we got an email from the young woman who was resigning in her role of council facilitator. And I asked her why, and I'm going to read directly from the email that she sent me. The final straw was Harry harping me about this certain proposal being incorrect because a call for nominations proposal was never done first. Call for nominations proposal is something that I started in 2015 because it was not done before. Essentially, these guys would just get around in a state Green Party meeting, a few of them, and they would kind of look around the room and they would say, okay, so who wants to be co-chair this year? And that was it. But now that we were starting to muster up, it was time to get more formal in the process. So I sent through a proposal 2 years ago with a call for nominations. So anyway, she says, because a call for nominations proposal was never done first, I have like 5 emails from him, and then he called my personal number while I was at work. I just don't have time to deal with these kinds of things anymore. So essentially that's what happened to the council facilitator. At that point, I took over, and I should state that once I took over, I declined voting. Now, we have a provision in our bylaws that specifically counts the two co-chairs, the state party co-chairs, as voting members of our council. But once I took on the facilitator role, I stopped voting because, I'm supposed to be impartial, right? I mean, it's kind of a basic ethical concern. So, one of the charges too that they're saying is that I would block proposals. Well, that's not true. What actually happens is that when you turn in a proposal to me, it has to follow our rules, and it has to be accurate, and there should not be hyperbole, and it has to be truthful, right? So our rules clearly state that if there's a proposal that comes to the state council, the state meeting floor, so in other words, a big in-person meeting, then you have to have 5 greens from around the state to sign this proposal, and then you submit it to the floor. The normal process for when it's outside of an in-person state meeting is that you have to have your local approve it. And many times the local, there'll be a representative from the local that sends a proposal through, and, we're kind of like gentleman's honor about whether or not it was democratically ratified, that sort of thing like that. And there were a couple of instances in which this particular person, Harry Hempy, would send through proposals that weren't correct. And that didn't contain accurate information. They were trying very, very hard to figure out a way to get me out of office. Instead of actually running a recall proposal, they were trying all kinds of different things, like, trying to change the date of the state meeting, trying to say that when our bylaws say 2-year terms for the co-chairs, that 2 years doesn't actually mean 24 months. It means 18 months, this sort of thing like this. And so we had already announced, my fellow co-chair and I, that the next state meeting was going to be in August, because that was 2 years from the time that I was elected and all the other officers were elected. And that's all there is to it, right? 2 years means 24 months, or at least as close as possible. And so they were trying all kinds of these sort of like, the thing of it is that the threshold for a recall proposal is 75% of the council, right? Whereas most proposals are only 60%. And so what my theory is that what they were trying to do was to get me out of office by changing the date of the state meeting, making it much, much earlier. And then in one case, in this proposal to change the state meeting date, they stated that one of our remote locals, now you have to understand, this is like 4 to 6 hours away from Denver, driving through the mountains to get to this local, that everybody was going to go have the state meeting in this remote local, and that the local chair had said, yes, I think, we'll go ahead and have the meeting here. Well, he didn't say that. And that was communicated to me. And so here's this proposal that has the falsehoods. And I say, this isn't true. You can't submit a proposal with information that is not true. So you need to remove that and you need to resubmit it. So I'm not exactly quoting chapter and verse because I don't have the proposal in front of me. But I think it's probably reasonable to say that if you want a binding action for the state party, that you have to be accurate in what you're stating. That seems to be fundamental, and I don't think that there needs to be a bylaw that says that. So, things like that, kind of massaging things, and so the proposal would come through that didn't make sense, or didn't, in some cases, this proposal that came through to try to change the meeting date of our state meeting, and they're trying to call for new or declare a vacancy in the co-chair seats. Well, no, I mean, we were in the co-chair seats, and things like this. And, just running a proposal through that only called for the vacancy really of myself, even the proposal calls for the vacancy of both co-chair positions. So the proposals have to make sense. I think that I've kind of, exhausted that idea. And so, this charge that I block proposals is really, no, you have to actually submit a proposal that can stand on its own, that works with the rules, that makes sense to people, that isn't dependent on information that's not accurate, that sort of thing. So, but the times that they have gotten proposals through, the problem is that their proposals either don't pass due to lack of quorum because people are not interested, or they just get defeated. And that's just what happens in democracy. One of the things that we have to learn how to do as Greens, because so few of us have actually had elected experience, these state council functions and these local decision-making functions, they really ought to be the proving ground for how we collaborate and how we lobby and how we convince each other and that sort of thing. And so you can't complain that your proposals are being blocked if A, they don't pass, B, they failed due to lack of quorum, and C, they keep having to being sent back to you to be edited for just basic stuff, right? So, one of the proposals that they tried to pass, and they actually did not get quorum on. Some of you may have heard that in 2016, there were some folks in Colorado that were trying to run a ballot initiative to institute a single payer system here in Colorado. It's called Amendment 69. Now, Colorado is one of the few states where you can actually, the citizens can put a ballot initiative on the ballot. So it was this incredible feat to even get it on the ballot in the first place, right? Our state constitution does a couple of things. Number one, our state constitution certifies and provides for the right of the people to recall elected officials. And you don't even have to have an excuse. You have to get a minimum number of signatures of the people who cast a vote in that election, et cetera, et cetera. But that right is guaranteed by our state constitution. Number two, unfortunately, we have a constitutional prohibition against using government money for abortion. It is what it is. I don't agree with it. I think women have to have the right to have the full range of reproductive services, even though I'm Catholic. Many of you know that. But that doesn't have anything to do with me. You need to make your own decision. Anyway, so this Amendment 69 was supposedly going to start a single payer system here in Colorado, but there were two sticking points with it for me personally. Number one was that it was not going to take on the constitutional prohibition against abortion. And so I reached out to one of the attorneys that were a part of the team that had submitted this ballot initiative, and I asked, okay, so why is this? Why would you not take this on? And their answer was, well, women can just get another insurance policy, and then they can have that coverage. You have to understand, I'm a working class woman. I've never been wealthy in my life. And the times that I've needed reproductive services, I've had to pay for them out of my own pocket. I've been underinsured except for the time that I was in the military. And right now I get Medicare, Medicaid. I never get the name straight. At any rate, either we cover everyone or this is just political expediency. And I feel very strongly about that. Again, that's my personal opinion. The other thing that this ballot initiative would have done would have been just for this elected body that would oversee this single payer system in Colorado. This elected body would not be subject to recall. And they would first be staffed. In other words, the appointments to this body at the beginning would be made by our governor. Now you have to understand, Governor John Hickenlooper, who talks smack about thinking that fracking fluid is easy to drink. He's a Democrat, but he's very neoliberal. And so the idea that a neoliberal was going to appoint someone to this insurance board, to the single payer healthcare board, that would not then create more hurdles is politically naive. We've seen it. We've seen it in any times the neoliberals kind of stir the pot up. We've seen it, right? So for me personally, these things were very fundamental. And there were a lot of people in the state council that were excited about Amendment 69. I myself had my opinion, and I was going to even ask the Denver Greens to come out and say no on this proposal, on this ballot initiative. There was a proposal that some of the proponents brought forth to the state council that asked whether or not we would endorse it, and it failed due to lack of quorum, because there were people on either side of this question People who didn't think that the bill was written correctly, didn't know how single payer could actually be implemented in the state, and it can't, because single payer is a federal thing. But, we understand that people were trying to get things done. But, we had differing opinions about it. And so what we eventually said, and this wasn't even official, right? Because of the fact that this proposal to endorse this ballot initiative failed due to a lack of quorum, then locals were able to endorse as they saw fit. Now, this proposal lost in Colorado 80% to 20%. So the proponents there was only 20% of the people who voted for it that were proponents. It doesn't matter. I mean, it seems like single payer ought to be a thing that the Green Party stands behind. We do. It's in our platform, that sort of thing. But what was interesting about this particular proposal was that my opinion now, my personal opinion, is being used as an example that I obstructed the proposal. And I didn't. It simply failed due to lack of quorum. My opinion as an individual is not binding. The only time that we take a binding decision is if a proposal is sent through our state council. We have a democratic process. Many of you don't know me, but I'm an incredibly ethical person. I follow the rules, kind of annoyingly so. Some of you that have worked with me can attest to that. But if a proposal fails when the state council, when the state party wants to take a position on something, it fails. Your responsibility as a sponsor is to try to resubmit it. Under the consensus process, if it fails, your responsibility as a sponsor is to try to convince people, right? So, yeah, it is true about the guy appointing the whole board. The governor would appoint the board. Well, there were some people that the Democrats would choose, and then the Republicans can choose. So, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Not the Greens. The Greens wouldn't have, not even the Libertarians would have had an option in that, right? But at this point, it's water under the bridge. But the idea that I would block a proposal that I didn't agree with is just insulting. If the democratic process does not pan out for you, that does not mean I am obstructing. And we've got to be very clear about that. I'm an opinionated person. I'm very clear about where I stand, and when I come to an opinion about something, I'm pretty hard and fast on it. I am an influential person as well. I'm the co-chair of this state party. I'm also a national co-chair. There are people who want to know what I think about things, but that's not the same as obstruction. It means I express my opinion. It means that it just fails in our state council. That's it. Their responsibility was to try to bring it back, to try to get us to consensus, to try to get us to an agreement seeking. But of course, the person who submitted this proposal, one of the former state council chairs, one of the former state co-chairs, how should I put it, was not really well known for getting things done. There it is. So if I don't agree with the proposal, I'm personally not going to submit it. The onus is on folks who really want to push that issue. It's not my job as a Green or as a state co-chair to try to anticipate the wishes of people who support a position that I don't support. That's not how it's done. I'm not the help. If people want to run a proposal, they have to run it on their own, and they have to figure out a way to bring it back to the table with more consensus. This is the way that government works. And so this idea that, we're just going to bail and we're just going to, get petulant because things didn't pan out that way, that's not how it works. That's not how civil rights were won. That's not how the Voting Rights Act was won. People went to the mat and they tried to convince and they tried to do, try to build consensus around these ideas. So now the proposal didn't pass. We got some people that apparently I have blocked who are trying to revisit history. Anyway, one of the proposals that went through, well, no, it didn't go through actually. There was a proposal last year to recall my former fellow co-chair, Bill Bartlett, and it was for a multitude of reasons. One of the reasons was that he was saying a whole lot of very sexist and very antagonistic kinds of things online. And there's all kinds of documentation that shows that. And, there's a question about, whether or not a co-chair should have free speech. I certainly exercise free speech, but I also have a judgment as to how free I can be. And there are things that I say on Facebook that are actually not open to the public, right? They're just open to my friends or whatever. So I try to be very judicial about the things that I say. Although there have been instances where folks have posed as my friends and actually taken screenshots, and then shared my opinions, my personal opinions, as if they were policy, which they were not. So Bill Bartlett was facing recall for the sexist terms. He was, talking about, invoking the ideas of reverse racism, saying things like, he was just getting upset about the amount of anti-white racism in the Green Party. And really, he would say things like that when people would say, listen, this is my experience. This is what really happens to me. This is what my life is like. And he would try to silence them. And then he would get pushed back. So, so somebody's saying, you got Bill Bartlett recalled when he submitted the proposal to Endless Colorado Care. I don't know what Endless Colorado Care is, but actually the truth of the matter is I was not the sponsor of the recall proposal. Now, there was an incident that happened at the People's Fair, which is like one of the big outreach events that the Green Party of Colorado does every year. And it's, it's done in front of our city council, and there's a lot of booths, and there's fun, and there's games, and all kinds of stuff like this. So we had an outreach booth, the Green Party of Colorado. At that outreach booth, this former co-chair, kind of lost a sense of professionalism. And after the People's Fair, because I would not agree with his interpretation of what racism is, he became angry with me, was actually intoxicated, and threatened to hit me. That's the truth. My husband was there. Unfortunately, no one else was there. And I understand the complication, because he's, my husband is going to support me. But the truth is that happened. So I'm here in a situation where I've got this thing that has happened to me, and I'm a co-chair. Typically speaking, if this sort of thing happens to someone else, there's going to be some sort of a semblance of a grievance. We are working on a grievance process right now because this doesn't exist, right? Typically, somebody might escalate things to the co-chair and say, hey, I've got this problem. But when you're a co-chair, who do you talk to, right? Who do you explain that to? I explained it to the secretary of the party, who is still the secretary of the party at this time. He also happens to be the co-chair of the Arapahoe County Green Party. And so when all of these kinds of things were going up with this guy, I had told this to the secretary. He decided to include it in the proposal as well. I did not write the proposal, and the secretary of the party and the current co-chair of the party will attest that, in fact, I asked them not to run the proposal because we were during the election season. But these two officers, or these two individuals, at one time, the guy who is now the current co-chair was at one time the co-chair of our local in Fort Collins, Colorado. And so their two locals got together and co-sponsored a proposal to recall this former co-chair because of his actions. Now, before they submitted the proposal, as I'm told, they called his former co-chair and they said, listen, we're going to run this proposal. We want to help you save face. Why don't you resign? And he did not take that advice. Instead, became belligerent from what I understand on the phone call, didn't resign, didn't whatever. And so they had given him an ultimatum and he didn't meet the ultimatum. And so they ran the proposal. We were about to get to, and again, a recall proposal, you need to have 75% of the state council voting. We were at 70% or so. And at that point, during the proposal was going through agreement seeking process, that former co-chair resigned. So a little bit afterward, we held a ranked choice voting, and another person who was at that time in the Fort Collins local, we call it the Poudre Valley Green Party, then became the co-chair, ranked choice voting, even beat out our former U.S. Senate candidate, who only got a few votes, but people overwhelmingly wanted to support Dave Bell from Fort Collins. So we are now co-chairs. He's serving the rest of that term, and he's going to be running for re-election in our state meeting in August. So those are kinds of the things that have been going on, right? Where my opinion, I don't know, I must be this big scary person, but my personal opinion is substituted, and folks pretend as if my opinion is fact, and it's not. In some cases, there are many people that agree with me in the state council. In some cases, they don't. In fact, in this Amendment 69 situation, there were many locals who didn't agree with me, you know, and it is what it is. We all can do that because decentralization. Decentralization means that a co-chair cannot dictate to a local what their opinion should be, and they should follow their own internal democratic process to approve it. And many of these locals who were supportive of it, they actually passed proposals to approve it. It is what it is, and it's no harm, it's no foul. We have a difference of opinion, no big deal. Everybody moves on. But the central issue, I think, really, and the biggest issue, I think, of this grievance is really around matters of race, gender, and class. There's a term that I use a lot, and because I'm a feminist of color, I use the term intersectionality. What does intersectionality mean? I'll just read you a quick definition. It's a concept often used in critical theories to describe the ways in which oppressive institutions, for example, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, classism, etc., are interconnected and cannot be examined separately from one another, right? So in the last video, I was talking about identity politics. My position is of intersectionality. It's not of identity politics. Identity politics is where tokenism comes in, or diversity, or representation. In other words, we can put a body there, we can put a face there, and we're going to get really worked up and gravitate all around putting that face or that body in that place. But we're not actually going to look at all of the other things that the other dynamics that are concerned, right? Democrats tend to use Democrats tend to use identity politics. You see this in the election of former President Obama. You see this now in the hoopla over Kamala Harris, the Attorney General for California. Two African American people, and the Democrats want to put a face forward without doing the critical thinking about what that face actually means, right? What does the policy that face has pushed and engendered, what does it actually mean to regular people? So I am an intersectional person, and I look at things through an intersectional lens. And so I'm not only going to look at your race, but I'm also going to look at your gender. I'm also going to look at your economic status. You know, I've said many, many times that, yes, you know, there is police brutality that is directed at Black people, but ask any homeless person, ask a white homeless person how they're being treated by the police as well, right? So we can't look at, in that instance, of just Black versus white when we're talking about police brutality. There are a lot of other dynamics involved here. In the case of the homeless person, someone, you know, from the perspective of class. And so because I'm a socialist, I look at things through race, class, and gender, but specifically class, but not only class. So we've been talking a lot about intersectionality in the Green Party of Colorado because these kinds of things really matter. And if you're really going to build a party of people who have a vested interest in having change, you have to make sure that you have the oppressed on board. I personally do not believe that the strategy that we've used in the past, that where we only, not necessarily, you know, intentionally, but we really have only tried to do any kind of organizing or outreach among people who tend to be a little counterculture, they tend to be a little bit more affluent, they're environmental minded, and they're of a certain age at this point. I don't believe that strategy has really contributed to much growth. We're very shaky financially as a national and state party as a result. And so we really have to, you know, when we have trouble with volunteers and getting people to share the load. So we really have to get smart about who we're talking to. And for me, people who really will get skin in the game are people who need change now. And often those people come from the oppressed. We have a lot of people that don't come from traditionally oppressed communities that are extremely good allies and do a lot of really, really wonderful work. I'm going to hold up Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zeese in that regard. These are people who don't face those kinds of challenges, but they're really got skin in the game. So intersectionality. We in the state party, many of us, most of us, I should say, are very interested in the issues of intersectionality. And so this word started bubbling up. And essentially, I would categorize the reaction that we got from some people as, what about me? Right? And so the problem when you talk about white privilege is that I don't like the term white privilege because it puts people on defensive, and it doesn't really talk about those interconnecting, those layers, those dynamics, right? And so there is a justifiable tendency among some white people when you're talking about critical race theory and some of these other theories, for them to feel a little kind of backed into the corner. And I think the way that some folks who focus on racial organizing and, you know, and racial justice, I think there are some people that focus on that work that maybe put white people on the defensive too much. And I can completely understand that. I don't particularly think that that's the right way to go. But what's interesting is that one of the main people who was really pushing this grievance has a problem with intersectionality. They didn't understand, this person didn't understand what it was all about at first, but took it upon himself to write a blog post. Oh, let me see, this was last year, December, about what intersectionality actually is. And so I've read you a definition. I've given you a material example because I'm on the left, and we do dialectical materialism. And so this article that was written tries to explain intersectionality. And let me just quote a couple things. Today, intersectionality is a powerful tool used to understand the interaction of power structures on minorities on multi-dimensional basis, including a person's race, gender, sexual orientation, family of origin, community environment, education, wealth, age, ability, skin color, hair color, weight, height, etc., etc. Okay? There is also growing recognition that these intersectional characteristics are not binary. There are more than two genders, more than two sexual orientations, more than black and white, more than blonde or brunette, more than fat and skinny. Now get this. This continues. Just to pick an example, the oppression of white homosexuals may be much more severe for people between 5'10" and 5'11". Granular intersectional data can be used to discover systematically oppressed sections of people that would not otherwise be obvious. That's not intersectionality. And any examination of race dynamics and how it affects the homosexual community, the LGBTQIA plus community, we know that things are a little bit different. And so he continues, as with any powerful technology, it's not technology, it's a critical race theory or a critical theory, right? We must use intersectionality with care. In my view, there is no redeeming value in using intersectional data to fine-tune an election campaign strategy to divide and conquer the electorate. Wow. Okay, so intersectionality is not eugenics. It's not dividing. It's about building solidarity because of the interlocking rings of oppression that each person faces, right? He continues, this is a call for balance in the Green Party. Understanding and resisting oppression in all sections of society is critically important, but so is unity, he says, solidarity, and common purpose. The party's ability to survive depends on our unity, not our divisions. I mean, it almost leaves me breathless, you know, and this is a common theme in the progressive cosmos right now. And if you've been paying attention to this whole blow up over Claudia Stauber and the other woman, the sane progressive woman, when they went to the UNAC conference and there was the closed room, the closed meeting space for Black activists. All of the blow up that we're starting to see from folks who call themselves progressives sounds like this. And essentially what they are saying is that people who come from oppressed communities need to shut up about what they experience because unity matters. But the price for unity in this particular framework that I've delineated here is silence. And as we say in the street, for those of us who actually do protest and do support Black Lives Matter, silence is violence. When you are an oppressed person and you come into that space where it's predominantly white male, affluent, whatever the case may be, and you make people uncomfortable because you're telling your truths, that's not the place for you. I say this as a working class woman of color. To have to silence your life experience, to not stand up for yourself, is violent. We think violence is only about striking someone or killing someone or using a weapon against someone. But there's also different kinds of violence. In fact, nowadays we talk about emotional abuse. In divorce cases now, it's admissible in court to talk about the emotional abuse that you get, right? And so when you're in an environment, when you're a person from an oppressed community, and the only way that you can have a vote or you can be regarded as someone worth a darn is for you to be quiet about your life experience, that is violence. And so the bulk of that proposal is about me pushing back against white supremacy, me expressing my opinions about feminism, me saying this, me saying that, me saying the other. It is what it is. Because this is who we've been dealing with in the Green Party of Colorado. And I will say, out of the nearly 14,000 registered voters that we have, this is a pocket of, at first it was like 15 people, but they turned in this grievance without actually asking people if they wanted to sign it. And so I think there's maybe about a dozen people. Yeah, and Julie points out psychic violence, absolutely. We know that this sort of thing of being silent it runs through generations. It affects the way that we live our lives as people from oppressed communities. We're not able to be free because our whole lives are about accommodating someone else's tender feelings. That's not freedom. Freedom is not living in the United States, but having to be silent about your life. That's not what this is about. But this is the bulk of what the grievance is about. As I said, screenshots of me pushing back against white supremacy, that sort of thing like that. And the thing of it is that the majority of people who are delegates on the state council of the Green Party of Colorado do not support that scenario. Instead, they support intersectionality. And that doesn't mean that white people don't have a voice, but it means that we find our commonality in all of our struggles. If homeless people are being beat down by the cops, if Black people are being beat down by the cops, if Native Americans are being beat down by the cops, guess what? Let's join together and push back on the cops. That's real simple. That's real easy, easy to understand. One of the things that we're going to pass, and I keep referring to this anti-oppression bylaws change that we're going to be looking at our state meeting on August 12th. What we've decided as the majority of the state council, what we've decided as the majority of the locals in the state party, is that we do not want to operate in a vacuum. We want to have our outreach, we want to have our success, we want to have our power building impacted and infused with the life experience of people that come from oppressed communities, right? So this bylaws change that we're going to pass, is going to recalibrate everything that we do. It even calls for when we have a budget. We don't have a treasurer right now because he resigned, not because he was pushed out, because he resigned. But we will have a budget that actually earmarks some money to this sort of thing. We're saying in this bylaws change, in keeping with the Green Party's third pillar of social justice, The Green Party of Colorado declares itself to be an anti-oppression party, actively dedicated to the work of ending capitalism and dismantling white supremacy and heteropatriarchy. As such, expressions of sexism, racism, classism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and other oppressive behaviors are not in keeping with the values of the Green Party of Colorado. Now, I've been critiqued because people took a private screenshot of what I said on Facebook last summer, where I said this party is going to get browner and more trans. And people who took the screenshot seemed to think that that meant only I am brown, but I'm not trans. So obviously it's a little illogical to think that that screenshot means that these are the only people that are allowed to be in the Green Party. Further, and let me read a little bit more. The Green Party of Colorado explicitly rejects the false ideas of reverse racism, misandry, etc., because we understand the role of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, etc. in the oppression of our comrades of all colors, genders, and sexual orientations. While it is possible for prejudice against white people, against men, against cisgender people, against straight people, or any other privileged group to exist, this prejudice is not oppression, because there are no institutional power structures designed to disenfranchise these privileged groups. Now, I have to say, critical race theory, racism equals power plus privilege, right? Or racism equals power plus bigotry. It is possible for people from oppressed communities to exhibit bigoted behavior towards people in the mainstream. It is absolutely possible. I don't excuse it. I understand it. I don't necessarily like it, but it happens for a reason. And people who are in privileged positions, and again, I don't like the word privilege, I'm looking for something different. But people who are in privileged positions, when they experience that sort of bigotry, when they experience that sort of pushback, that sort of attitude, instead of calling it racism, because it's not racism, because most oppressed people do not have access to the same power structures that white heterosexual people do, for example, and affluent ones at that. It's not racism. And what it should inspire people in privileged positions to say is, why is this person angry? If you're really worried about solidarity, if you're really worried about unity, that pushback, that sense of bigotry that you get from somebody who's from an oppressed community should cause you to ask questions. That's not an excuse, even though it's natural, but it's not an excuse for you to let fragility dominate a conversation, right? That's not, what is it? The Kennedys used to say, to whom much is given, much is expected, or I'm paraphrasing it, and I'm sure that that's not exactly what it says. But the truth of the matter is that when you don't have to deal with as much in your life, when you don't have the system weighing down on you, when you get to walk through your city, your town, basically unmolested, right? Then you have a different burden of understanding. Then that means that the system is skewed toward you, and you need to do something about it. So, we've been here for a little while here, for almost an hour. Yeah. What about me? Yeah. Well, you too. But sometimes triage means that you have to take care of the one who's the most injured first. Anybody with any sense of compassion can understand that. Can understand the concept of triage when we're dealing with race, class, gender, and all these other oppressions. This is not hard. And unless you feel like you're an entitled person and you're entitled to everything and to all the attention, to all the power, then this shouldn't be a problem for you, right? But apparently it is to some people. But that kind of thing is what's really been dominating that really dominates most of this grievance. I'm not going to back down from this position. I'm not going to back down from a position of intersectionality, of being in solidarity with everyone. The way that I've carried myself in our state council forum has been very patient. I've had people throw ad hominems at me. I've had people use obscenities at me. I've had people completely misrepresent my words, put words in my mouth, do all of that silencing thing that people with privilege tend to do sometimes. They try to tell you what your opinion is. They try to tell you what your intention was. All you got to do is look black and white. I'm not dealing with you in that way, right? So I've been extremely patient. And we'll see. We're going to have a state meeting on August 12th in Aurora, Colorado. There are people who are facing disciplinary actions. One of the people who have run forth with this grievance, because of the divisiveness, because of his lack of candor and the lack of truth in the proposals, because of the fact that this person actually could not pass proposals through our state council, and to retaliate, ask the national party to dissolve our affiliation with GPUS. Them's fighting words. So right now the proposal is before the state council, and it's at 90%. And what this disciplinary proposal will do will keep this person from participating in our state council, coming to our state meetings, state events, that sort of thing like that, for 3 years. That's it. Whereas these people asked for my lifetime ban because they didn't agree with the concept of intersectionality. All the other stuff that they were trying to pull forward and they were trying to talk about, the people with good intentions can understand. People with good intentions will say, hey, what did you mean by that? Hey, I don't understand their process. I'm happy to explain those things, right? People without good intentions who really want to take control of things and who really want to ignore the needs of everyone else, of course, are not going to understand all those things. They're not going to ask for clarification. They're not going to try to build consensus. They're not going to do any of those kinds of things. So that's really the long and the short of it. Trying to see if there's any questions here that some of you might have had. I don't know. One of the people that I've blocked is saying, endorse Colorado Care. Well, I'm not going to endorse Colorado Care. It failed 80-20. Unless you cover full reproductive services for all working class women, then forget it. Then that's political expediency, and I personally don't do that. So there. So yeah, that's kind of the long and the short of it. It's almost been an hour. I try not to go over an hour because I can talk a lot, but I'm going to look to see if you all have any questions before we sign off. I don't really see anything. So we'll leave it at that. Great. You know where to find me if you have more questions, if you want more clarification. And I will say, take the time in your state parties and in your local parties to make sure that you have clear process, that folks are really, that there's a democratic process for making decisions. Follow it to the letter. I have a friend that says, in the absence of structure, privilege dominates. So, you have to make sure that things are fair. And while there may be a gentleman's agreement in the way that you've been running your locals here lately, I really have to recommend, and I have to say that the more diverse our local and state parties become, the more that rules are going to be necessary, because people need to understand where the boundaries are. People need to understand what the recourse is. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say. Ask me if you have any, or let me know if you have any questions. If there's an aspect about this grievance that you wanted to ask me about, they've painted me as an evil person. I will even say that because they still cannot get the results that they want, they've even gone as far as running background checks on my family. And I have screenshots that show that they're colluding to try to make a big deal about it and, try to discredit us based on who we are. We're working class people in my family. We're people of color. We have had life challenges. I've faced a foreclosure in my past. I have people in my family that have other issues as well, legal issues as well. But these folks are running background checks on the family members that I have to try to sort of, leverage or discredit me or something like that. And, I think that when people get to that point, it's, I think it's done. So, okay, there it is. Let me know if you have questions, and have a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye now.